Welcome. Here's a video on how to compare strings. And I just threw up some code here, and I will go over it little by little here. We got line 3 is a string. We know that to be A, B, C, D, E, F. And here we have a string Y that starts off to be A, B, C. But what we're going to do is take that A, B, C that's inside Y, inside the variable Y, and concatenate it with D, E, F. So I suppose Y would also be A, B, C, D, E, and F. All right? So if I were to run this program right now, okay, your first impression would be to say, well, listen, does X equal to Y? I think so. X equals Y sounds perfectly plausible, should work. Okay, so let's not worry about the second output here, down 15 through 20. Let's not worry about that. Just the first line says they're not equal. Okay, and here's where the big problem happens with strings, okay? Strings are not simple primitive data types like integers and doubles and booleans. Those are simple data types. They can be stored in a CPU register. Okay, strings are objects, and objects are referred to by their reference. So when you see the word X, okay, when you see the variable X, X is really a pointer to an object, not the contents. So what this double equals means is, does X and Y, do they point to the same object? And I don't think that's the case, right? Here, X points to an object that has that value there. Y points to another object that has the same value, but they're two different objects. Here's what I mean. Here's X. X is a variable. It points to an object that contains that's the best I can do, A, B, C, all the way up to E. Let's just pretend that says A, B, all the way up to E. Okay? Now Y is pointing to a different object. It just so happens it contains the same A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Let's not go that far. Okay, they're pointing to two different objects, but those objects are basically the same value. Okay, so since X and Y don't equal each other, then they're pointing to different objects. They're considered not equal. Now let's pretend that just to show you what I'm talking about here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle that comment out, and what I'm going to do is say string Y equals X. You know what that does? Let me start off with a new picture here. Let's see, file new, start a new one. Okay. What that does is we have X pointing to an object. Okay. We know that's an object in there. The second assignment was Y equals X. So Y is going to point to the same object. Okay, that's what you're really doing when you're assigning one object to another. You're assigning references. In this case, that'll be equal. Okay, then they're the same. So the long and the short of it is this. You have to understand the idea that when you're dealing with objects, you're dealing with their references, their pointers. And when you're dealing with strings, you're going to get, if you do something like this, you're going to get sort of an undefined way. You're going to get an output that just doesn't make some sense sometimes. And so now you're aware of what the problem is. So you're going to say, well, how do I determine whether two objects contain the same values? Okay, this is what you need to do. You need to use the dot equals method. Okay, if this doesn't work, then dot equals will work. This is the one that you need. The dot equals is a method that takes a look at the contents of X and compares it with the contents of Y. If they're exactly the same characters in those two things, then they would be equal. And regardless of whether they're the same object or not, okay. In this case, there's definitely not the same object, but those two different objects contain. Okay, those two different objects contain. See, this is one object right here. These two objects contain the same characters, and the dot equals it will determine that for sure. Now, let's do one other thing before we terminate the video, and that is let's do something else. Now we'll use this thing. Say we have a string, and string we'll say Tony equals Tony. All right, makes sense. Then we have another string, Tom equals Tom. And what I would like to do is say, well, I want to determine which one is less than or greater than each other. Okay, so your first reaction would be to say, well, first off, of those two strings, which one would be the smallest one? Okay, it's too bad now that the telephone book went the way of the dodo bird. But in the old days, we had a telephone book, and we looked up people's names, and we knew how to do that because the names were in sorted order. What you would do instinctively is compare the characters. The T's are the same. If they're the same, you compare the next character. Well, in this case, the O's are the same. Then we have a difference here in the third character, N and M. M being smaller than N, you'd expect that Tom would be less than Tony. It would be placed before Tony. So your gut reaction would be say, well, Tom is less than Tony, and you're going to get a compiler error. Okay, you're just going to get a compiler error. Let me just put something in here. Say Tom is less than Tony. All right. Now, how do we do this? Why? Well, first off, less than only works for simple data types, integers, doubles. That's about it. That's all the less than is defined for. I know other languages let you compare strings as easily as that, but unfortunately, these aren't other languages. So, what do you need to do? Here's what you need to do to determine the relative size or compare strings. Okay, so I'm going to keep this over here for now, but here's what you're going to do. You're going to need to use what's called the compare to method. Tom dot compare to Tony. Okay, now this compare to method returns a number. It's either a negative number, 0, or a positive number. The actual value of that number is not that important. It's just whether you have a negative number, positive number, or a 0. If it returns 0, the two strings are the same. But you don't use the compare to for equality because you have an equals method. What you usually use the compare to for is to determine if something is less than or greater than. Okay, and so what you want to do is basically mimic this pattern here. In this case, what you're going to do is say, well, if it's less than 0, then Tom is less than Tony. Okay, then Tom is less than Tony. We'll get rid of this, and it'll work great. Let's do an else part, else, and let's put this in here. Copy, paste, and Tom is greater than Tony. All right. So that's another thing you need to be aware of when you're dealing with strings. There's a compare to method as well. Let's run this. Tom is less than Tony. Works good. Works great. Now, you should also be aware of that there's a couple of other methods. Equals is case sensitive. Compare to is case sensitive. That means that little e and big E are different characters. Okay, if you want to do an equality based on generically E and big E being the same value, in other words, case insensitive, Then there's another type of equals called, there's another equals method, and we can just bring it up like this, dot equals ignore case. And that basically does exactly what it says. I don't care about the case of the letters. Lowercase letters are the same as uppercase letters. And there's also compare to ignore case as well. So if I do compare to ignore case, and it doesn't matter whether I have capital T or big T, it's going to work exactly the same way. So if I go ahead and put, let's do capital T here for Tom, let's see, it'll work the same. It doesn't matter. See, Tom is less than Tony. Same way. So now that you know about strings and how to compare strings, you could use this for your programming projects. Okay, we'll see you in the next video.